All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here on day 10. Day 10 of Pulmonary Wellness Online. I have a special guest today. This is my friend Alan. Alan, tell them how young you are.
92.
You're only 92?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
You just told me 95, didn't you?
I lied.
All right, he's between 92 and 95. This guy works out like a beast, and I wanted to know, Alan, if you have anything you'd like to share with people on day 10 of Pulmonary Wellness Online. So these are people that are at home doing the exercise, doing the meditations, getting the education.
So what should I tell him to do?
Well, you could tell them whatever you like, but do you have any advice or words of encouragement that
The words of encouragement are very simple. Because only the good die young.
That's your words of encouragement?
That's my words of
You heard it. Only the good die young. And I know that there are a bunch of badasses out there watching this, so you guys have nothing to worry about, according to this man, Alan Oppenheim.
That's me.
All right. Let's do it, people. Day 10. Give him the number 10 sign. Move it in a little. All right, people. Have a great day. All righty. Day number 10. Day number 10. And today's question comes to us from Patricia P. Patricia Panapinto. Okay? So her question is, I would like to learn more about mitral valve prolapse, its symptoms such as shortness of breath, and how, if you have it and you have COPD, you can tell if your shortness of breath is from the mitral valve prolapse or from the COPD. And that's a great question. And that is a question that is something that I'm very, very interested in. In addition to the lungs, I'm also very interested in the heart. And if you've heard me speak any number of times, you know that I'm very interested in the beauty of the cardiopulmonary system as a whole. It really is one system, although in today's medicine, in today's medical world, they're broken up into cardiovascular and pulmonary, but it's really the cardiopulmonary system, and they work beautifully together in probably the most synergistic example of human mechanics anywhere. So, look what I have, a heart. And you said I was heartless. So the idea is first to talk a little bit about the anatomy of the heart, okay? And as you know, the heart is a pump, and the heart has 4 chambers. And there are 2 upper chambers, okay? And those 2 upper chambers are called the atria. One of them is called an atrium. So as an example, the left atrium, together they're called the atria. And then we have the 2 lower chambers called the ventricles, okay? So the atria can be considered the receiving chambers, meaning that blood comes to the atria. The ventricles can be considered the pumping chambers. Now, even though we talk about the idea that the heart is a pump, I would pose the idea to you that the heart is really 2 pumps, a right-sided pump and a left-sided pump, which is why we talk about the idea of the right heart and the left heart. And you may have heard that from like a right heart catheterization or a left heart catheterization, et cetera, et cetera. And this is particularly poignant when we're talking about pulmonary disease, because most problems in the heart occur on the left side of the heart. So as an example, valve problems, okay, occur more frequently on the left side of the heart than the right side of the heart. Why is that? Okay, first of all, the left side of the heart is the high pressure side of the heart. And the reason why it's the high pressure side of the heart is because the left ventricle is responsible for pumping blood throughout your entire body. The right side of the heart is the low pressure side of the heart because the right ventricle is only responsible for pumping blood to the lungs, which are only a few inches away. So with that in mind, when we think of it from a wear and tear perspective, the left side of the heart usually takes much more of a beating than the right side of the heart. However, When you have lung disease, okay, whether it be pulmonary fibrosis, whether it be COPD, or any other lung disease that increases the resistance in the pulmonary circulation, pulmonary hypertension, etc., this is going to substantially increase the workload on the right side of the heart. And since the right side of the heart is not built for that kind of pressure, that can also lead to complications. Now the question is about the mitral valve, okay? The mitral valve sits in between the left atrium and the left ventricle, okay? Another name for the mitral valve is the bicuspid valve because it has two cusps or two leaflets, okay? In the right atrium and the right ventricle is what we call the tricuspid valve. And those are both called the AV valves. So the mitral valve, which is on the left side of the heart, and the tricuspid valve, which is on the right side of the heart, are both AV valves because they sit in between the atria and the ventricles. So they're called atrioventricular valves. There are also two valves called the semilunar valves. Now, on the left side of the heart, it's the aortic valve, and on the right side of the heart, it's the pulmonary or pulmonic valve. And as I mentioned, since the left side of the heart is the high pressure side of the heart, more often than not, by a huge margin, you will see more problems with the mitral valve and or the aortic valve because those two are taking the greatest wear and tear. Now, when it comes to a valve, okay, valves respond to changes in pressure. So what that means is that blood enters the atrium, okay, and we have a passive flow of blood, from the atria to the ventricles, and that is occurring due to a pressure gradient. Now, when the pressure in the ventricles exceeds the pressure in the atrium, we have a closure of the AV valve. So the mitral valve and the tricuspid valve close. Then when the pressure in the left ventricle and the right ventricle exceed the pressure in the aorta and the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary circulation respectively, then the semilunar valves, the aortic valve and the pulmonic valve, open. And then when the pressure in the aorta and the pressure in the pulmonary circulation exceed pressure in the ventricles, then those two semilunar valves close. I know that's a lot, okay? But I'm laying the groundwork for you. I know that's a lot. Now, what you need to know is that there are basically three different types of abnormalities that we can see when it comes to the heart valves, okay? The first is when the valve is too tight, and that is what's called stenosis. So for example, if the mitral valve is too tight, you have what we call mitral stenosis, and that means there's a decrease in blood flow from the left atrium to the left ventricle, and that can go back into the lungs. You can also have what we call insufficiency, where when the valve is supposed to be closed, it does not close all the way. And so as a result, we have backflow through that valve. So for example, that is called regurgitation. So for example, mitral regurgitation, when the left ventricle is contracting, the mitral valve is supposed to be closed nice and tight so that blood does not go back into the atria. However, when you have mitral insufficiency, you can have what's called mitral regurgitation. When the left ventricle contracts, blood flow actually goes in two directions. Blood will go forward into the aorta, and blood will also go backwards into the left atrium. Finally, we have what's called prolapse, and we almost always hear this in response to mitral valve prolapse, and what that means is that when the valve is supposed to be closed, so the mitral valve is what we call a bicuspid valve, which means it's got two cusps. They open and close like this, okay? And the thing is, when you have mitral valve prolapse, what that means is that a part of the mitral valve actually goes back into the atria. And while it can cause shortness of breath, it's generally benign. It's more noted for high heart rates and or palpitations, which are often treated, like for example, with a beta blocker. Okay, so you asked another very good question, which is, how do we know which is which? Okay, that's a great question. So as I say over and over again, between our neck and our belt, we have multiple systems. Most importantly, the cardiovascular system, the pulmonary system, the gastrointestinal system, and the symptoms of all three are sometimes somewhat similar. Okay? And so what you don't want to do is you don't want to make an assumption that you know what it is just because you've had one of these things before. And that's another pitfall that I talk about, or potential pitfall, which is that because you've had COPD for 20 years, everything is attributed to your COPD. But it doesn't mean that you can't have COPD and something else. So the key is always going to be a good differential diagnosis. The key is always going to be a good workup with your physician, letting them go through all the standard testing and procedures in order to really determine what is from COPD, what is from mitral valve prolapse, or anything else that might fall into that realm. And again, we've spoken about symptoms before. We've also spoken about my differential diagnosis, but that's the way you do it, okay? I would say, is there any way to be sure that it's either your mitral valve or your COPD? I don't think so, okay? But the keys to this are regular checkups to determine the progression or lack of progression of your COPD, regular checkups to determine or the progression or lack of progression of your mitral valve, and then comparing different things. Hopefully that means you have a good internist, a good cardiologist, and a good pulmonologist. So I hope that helps. Again, today is day 10. Everybody have a great day. Have a perfect 10. Bye-bye.